Recently, I received an email by a viewer of the program who suggested I look into Gene Dixon's vision of the Antichrist. In Christian circles, we would be leery of reading too much into the visions and prophecies of psychics. The Bible makes it clear to stay away from diviners and spiritualists. These people, in most cases, are tapping into power from the side of evil, and no word given by them can be trusted. Some may be able to see the future because they are possessed by a demonic spirit. Paul ran into a slave girl who made money for her masters by telling the future by way of being possessed by a spirit. But not all visions by non-Christian sources are untrue. Nebuchadnezzar was not a righteous man when he had his dream of the statue which told of the major world powers and empires throughout time before the return of Christ. For those who study end-time events and prophecy, looking at visions and predictions by other sources can give a glimpse into the enemy's camp and show us events that the enemy may be planning. Jean Dixon was born in 1918 and died in 1997. In the latter part of her life, she was probably best known as a tabloid psychic, making predictions about celebrities that were usually wrong. Living in Washington, D.C., she made several predictions in the 1940s and later that came true. And this launched her credibility to those who say and saw her as a prophetess. These predictions included India splitting into two countries, which later had happened. Pakistan was created as a new country for the predominantly Muslim population of that area. She predicted the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi. She predicted the election and later assassination of President Kennedy. She predicted the launch of the first space satellite, Sputnik, by the Russians, and the death of UN Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld in a plane crash. Being of Catholic faith, she made a prediction about the Pope, part of which seemed to have come true with the assassination attempt on Pope John Paul II. Her vision of the Antichrist and the rise of the false prophet to a certain extent are intertwined. She sees the U.S. playing a major role in these events. She sees a government inside a government taking control of the United States and a well-oiled political machine of running the leading political families of the U.S. through political intimidation, propaganda, and illegal six-column activity. They will show the nation that only their man should be president, and when they've taken control, they will give rise to an upheaval of our social structure as never before seen. They will bring increased social unrest and great discontent. Foreign subversive elements will infiltrate the unruly factions as they did in the 1960s and cause renewed fighting on the nation's campuses and racial ghettos. The false prophet's domain shall be the intellectual seduction of mankind, a mixture of political, philosophical, and religious ideology. She sees the Antichrist being born on February 5th, 1962, somewhere in the Middle East. She sees him revolutionizing the world, bringing the world together with one all-embracing faith. The youth of the world will idolize him. She felt he was a descendant of the pharaohs, specifically the pharaoh Akhenaten. Some of these events mentioned sound like they could be happening today, and it's interesting that Miss Dixon sees a connection between the Antichrist and the pharaoh Akhenaten. The date she gave for the birth of the Antichrist is close to the date of Obama's birth. As discussed in episode 2 of the program, we show patterns between Barack Obama and the pharaoh Akhenaten. And this makes you wonder, can this mean that Obama is the Antichrist? Generally, I personally don't believe that Obama is. Especially, the evidence is very circumstantial against him. And only time will really tell uh, whether he is or he isn't. Especially in the events of the next few years and leading up to 2012 will give us the best picture of Obama's prophetic future. Um, in a sense, he's a type of Antichrist, because he claims to be a Christian, and yet he pushes the other religions and things over Christ, instead of Christ and against Christ. Uh, but that's, different than being the Antichrist. He's definitely pulling the country in a direction that it hasn't been, and the majority of people don't want it to be. Um, and that's destructive. But history is full of people like that, and that doesn't necessarily mean he's any different than others who have tried in the past. Other than that, he's having success right now, but he's kind of teetering on this. Whether he'll be thrown out like Jimmy Carter in the next term, and then maybe even a lot of his stuff repealed, or whether something happens that allows him to be reelected, kind of like a Bill Clinton who tried to do some of the same things, but once he got basically slapped down by the people, he moved towards the center and was able to stay elected and just put in little things at a time. So like I said, we'll only really tell in the future. The future will tell. And one of the great things about living in America is that we have the ability, when we don't like what we see by our politicians, that we have the ability to vote them out and to undo things that they've done. Of course, there has to be enough people who want to do that, and maybe in this case it will. It certainly seems that way, but again, I just kind of wonder, these New World Order types behind the scenes have for years been wanting to push the kinds of things that Obama's having some success putting through right now. And it's hard to believe that they're going to let this stuff go without a fight, or that they're just going to let the American people say, no, we don't want it. And kind of like with the vote on the health care, they knew a vast majority of people didn't want it, and it doesn't look like a good idea. And but they still voted for it anyways. Um, and they know they're going to pay a certain price politically in the upcoming elections. But I just wonder, is something on the horizon that will kind of change things? Um, Probably not, in the sense that usually politically it doesn't happen that way. One of the groups oversteps their bounds and the other group takes over, and this seems to be what's going to happen. But you never know. In Britain, a new surveillance technology is being tested. The speed spike system, which can calculate the average car speed between 2 points, is currently being developed by PIPS Technology Limited, an American company with a presence in Hampshire, England. The system uses a combination of license plate reading technology with GPS satellites. The British government hopes to use this low-cost technology for speed enforcement and to reduce traffic congestion. And the British government hasn't been shy in using surveillance technology on its people, and it seems to be a trend that will probably continue throughout Europe and possibly America. I thank you for your interest in the show, and may God bless and keep you.
The Revelation 13 podcast is hosted by Mike Hopwood and is a podcast dedicated to the study of end-time events, news events, and ancient mysteries.